I'd like to welcome everybody to the fourth annual Authors and Artists Festival. Um, Basically, this is the fourth one that's happening. And please check out natureculture.net. They have a lot of great things that are going on. They have many things that they are putting on. The whole day, the various tracks, the three tracks of all these great speakers and panelists they are being recorded and they will be being able to be viewed later. So please come back and check out all those that you want to see later. So you can see all the sponsors. Because of these sponsors, we do have it's free for all the folks who can come to be attendees. You're always welcome to donate to help try to keep making these kinds of things happen. If you go to natureculture.net, you'll see ways to be able to help support the work that they're doing there with all kinds of books related to land trusts, preservation of land, the concepts about rewilding land, all that great stuff. And please check out all the authors and all the panelists that you see here today. They have great work that's out there, and they are presenting other things too that they are doing. So it'll be great to make sure that they are all acknowledged and seen for the work that they're doing. Welcome.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to our session. So we have a very interesting, very diverse session today. So my name is Kirsten Martin, and I'll let my two compatriots quickly introduce themselves. So either Steve or Chris.
Go for it, Chris.
Okay. I'm Christopher Croucher, and I look forward to letting you know a little bit about my work as well before we get started with discussion.
And I'm Steve Trombulak, and I'll say the same thing. We'll dig into the conversation, and I'll say more about what brings me to the conversation when it's my turn in the circle.
Okay, thanks, guys. So, like I said, welcome to our session, and the title of our session is the Interdisciplinarity and Integration of Arts and Sciences. So it's kind of it's an interesting take in this whole festival that we have both artists and scientists, and all of us are really kind of merging those two aspects of the same world. I don't want to say they're separate worlds because they aren't. Sometimes they're perceived that way, but we're all kind of working and merging all these kind of areas in the same universe. And I get to go first. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I get to go first. So again, I said, my name is Kirsten Martin. I am the program director for environmental science and associate professor of biology at the University of St. Joseph, which is a small liberal arts university in West Hartford, Connecticut. And being in the biology department, my discipline is entomology, aquatic science, environmental science. But I'm also really well known for constantly putting art or highlighting art and music and other humanities in all of my science classes. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to kind of introduce you guys to some of the projects that I've done over the years. And these aren't just with students. They also involve the local community as well. So one of the first projects that really strongly integrated the arts and humanities was one that I started about 2 years ago and really ramped it up, really ramped it up last year. And this is called the Lenses on the Land project. And the project is focused on the Connecticut River watershed, but particularly the Connecticut River watershed, obviously within Connecticut, closer to the greater Hartford area, because our campus is literally right outside of Hartford. And most of our students at the university are fairly local, but they also really don't know the region they live in. They really haven't gone out and explored much. And the students in this project were both science majors and humanities majors, so English majors, literature majors. And we wanted to find a way to get kind of both disciplines to really become better at observing and being better at being aware of their local environments by essentially mixing things up. So throwing science at the literature folks and throwing art at the science folks, and throwing them both together to work on this project. So the Lenses on the Land project integrated art and or humanities activities alongside of science activities. So the classes that it was embedded in a couple of English courses, and then most notably, it was embedded into an aquatic science course that I teach. And the aquatic science course is kind of unusual in that it is an online lecture, so I never see the students in the lecture portion. And then we meet for 4 all-day field intensive labs where we travel across the state of Connecticut and visit a different location and a different type of watershed each week. So the students were learning, obviously, the aquatic science, techniques and topics, and then they would be exposed to one or more arts or humanities project, typically in the field, right alongside the projects. And these were not presented separately. So all of the arts and all of the sciences given during that particular lab had a connection to each other. And they all were kind of focused on the same aspect of increasing observation skills or monitoring the environment. So in the upper left-hand portion here, you can see one of the first activities we did, and this is wintergreen oil transfer technique. So students had used photocopied images of local landscape and then transferred them onto reclaimed wood boards using pure wintergreen oil that had been harvested. And they had done this in conjunction with learning about trees and doing some stream survey work on the same day. And I would say students initially were quite resistant to this idea. And these are all science majors, by the way. They were initially resistant to the idea, but then after about 10 minutes, they didn't want to stop. And they also kept asking, what are we going to do next lab? So quite interesting to see the reactions. Over to the right, this is suminagashi, which is a water marbling technique, essentially floating pigments on top of water. And you can see the students are being very fashionable in this picture, wearing waders. And that is because in this lab, we were doing physical assessment of streams, so flow rate and channel width and all that good stuff. And they'd also tested water quality of the site. And the site is one of the most contaminated sites that I monitor in Connecticut. So I thought it was kind of apropos that we would take water from this location that typically has a pretty bad reputation of not being clean, and using it to kind of create beautiful artwork. And I wasn't really prepared for this, but when the students were floating the pigment on the water, the colors started really changing because they were reacting with all the nasty stuff in the water. But it turned out to be essentially another way to monitor water quality. And it was also rather interesting because in this technique, the idea is that humans don't manipulate the art. Nature essentially creates the art. So all the movement of the pigment is due to wind vibrations and sound vibrations. We're next to a busy road here. So every time a car went by, that actually altered the paintings. And the students started going like, wow, humans really have an impact on their environment, don't I? And I was going, yes. Lovely teachable moment, really, really wonderful to see them kind of getting so involved. Then in the lower left-hand corner, this was definitely a favorite amongst the students. This was recreating GIS land cover imagery into recycled glass, stained glass mobiles. So they had looked at a whole series of GIS images from the sites they had visited during the semester, had to pick one, and then had to replicate that image or interpret that image using little pixels of recycled glass into essentially epoxy in order to make images of the waterway. And it really forced them to focus in on an area and understand what it meant, and really kind of see their landscape in a different way, a very tactile way. And then in the lower right, we have 2 different things that went on. So during the entire semester, they were given nature journals and had to do reflections on each site, as well as going out and venturing in the landscape on their own and making nature journal reflections. So this is from our trip down to the Long Island Sound, Hammonasset Beach. And then they also did cyanotyping. So they did solar printing essentially for each of the habitats we visited on the shore. They had to find found objects and create art from that. So from all these different experiences, and again, we also involved English classes as well as the general public in some of these workshops. It really was interesting at the end of the semester when we put together an art show for the community. And I also kind of asked them to reflect on the whole thing. I was expecting an awful lot of, why was art in a science class? This wasn't what I signed up for. And across the board, I had absolutely no negative comments. And all of them were very long reflectives about how much they hadn't noticed in their surroundings before, and how if there hadn't been that highlight in art, they probably wouldn't have looked as much. So that to me was a definite win and a reason for why we should highlight these connections between art and science. Then the next thing I want to quickly talk about is a series that I've been running for about 3 years now at the university. It's called Embracing Our Environment. And there's a link here. You go to the main USJ website, type in this word, and you'll see what's on the docket for this year. But the whole purpose of this series is to celebrate these connections between arts, humanities, and particularly the environmental scientists. So we invite in artists that are using art to talk about major health issues in the environment. We've had artists come in that use natural minerals and soils to create art. This semester, all of our series is focusing on insects, because I'm getting to teach an entomology class. So all of the workshops are kind of around that theme. So we have a couple of artists that are going to talk about public perception of insects and the role of insects in culture and the role of insects in science and how it all kind of works together. Excuse me. And then one workshop, it's going to be definitely hands-on. It's actually happening Monday of this week. And that is the insect batik workshop. So this is definitely celebrating insects in all their glory. I am an ornithologist, so I actually study dragonflies. Of course, I had to make one of these with dragonflies. But we're using natural silk, which of course is an insect product. We're using beeswax for the wax resist, again, an insect product. We are then dyeing the silk with both insect-based inks, so a lot of insects can be used for dye baths, and plant-based inks. And then, of course, we're going to use stencils that are insect-related. So my entomology class, this is going to be their lab on Mondays. It's doing this workshop, and then I'm also running about 3 other workshops on the same day for other people. But it's, again, an idea, a way for them, particularly the entomology students, to see that entomology, study of insects, is more than just pinning an insect in a box. Really kind of being aware of, this wider impact of this particular group of animals in the wider world. So I will stop sharing. I know this was quick, but it is just a fast way through the environment. All right, so I will pass it on to Chris.
Okay.
Hi all. Thank you so much, Kirsten. It's wonderful to see the breadth of the work that you're doing with the students. I am coming from sort of the other end of the spectrum. I am an artist, a performer, and a healer, and all of that sort of comes into the work that I do, which on a public-facing level is my series, Letting the Land Lead. It is very heavily dance-based, but there is some sort of, I call it subliminal education that goes along with it. I take the time to sort of research the area in which I'll be performing, and through a process that I'll talk about briefly, I create a dance piece and then bring it to a natural space and share it with an audience, and sort of bring them into the process of understanding really what's going on in their local environment, which I think is something that we often skip over because we're so, we get on the news and see volcanoes or hurricanes or things like that, and we don't necessarily, unless you're tuned into it, really see the local impact of what's going on, really, unless you're tuned in. And sort of keeping track and having a personal experience. So I will pull up the photos and share my screen. So these are some of the performances that I have been doing over the last year and a half or so. So these performances, what I do is pair with a local land trust or a conservation space or town to ask about what their needs are, what they're trying to bring attention to. That process is sort of building. I've been doing this for about 2 years now, and in 2024, I'm hoping to really focus on building those relationships more strongly, and really understanding what the needs of the space are. Um, then I find dancers who are interested in working with me for a particular piece, hopefully local dancers. Again, it's really a local focus. And we go into a studio, create the work, and then bring it to a space. And the title "Letting the Land Lead" is really about being in a dance partnership with the land. So much like in tango, the land becomes our leading partner. So the movement that we created in a flat, easy to dance in studio space suddenly has to change because of the space that we're in. And it's really a process of listening to the land that we're dancing with. So the first photo was a fall performance that I did in October of last year. The themes change for each. So the first one was about what has to die away in order for rest to happen through the winter and then to grow back in the spring. This is the summer performance from this year, just about a month and a half ago, and it was about nourishing or being nourished by the land, and how we have a reciprocal relationship with the land in that way. This was my winter performance. I dance on point, and this was sort of this only happened on film, so so these are some still shots from that. And this was the first performance, the first live performance of this that I did. This group, this was April of 2022. We were emulating the flocking patterns of geese that this space where we're dancing is a migratory bird sanctuary. And then this was this spring. It's blurry because it's a moving shot from the film, where we were, my dance partner and I here were emulating the river in its movement and talking about how our impact on the watershed in this area, particularly the Nashville River watershed, the changes that we've seen over the last 70 years or so, and what that looks like now. And these last two photos are, I led a Letting the Land Lead retreat back in September, and really gave the process a multi-day experience for folks to come in, and we had a camping event and really communed with the land through movement and self-exploration. So so there's the link. We can also pop these in the chat before the video is over, or before our panel is over. But I will stop sharing and just give one last point, which is each of these. So I come from a healing background as well. So I do a lot of guided meditation and spiritual work, and I bring that into this process by creating a soundscape for each of these performances that includes a guided meditation for the audience to go along with us. And so really getting them into an experience of connecting with the land meditatively, and then sort of subliminally at the end slipping in the information that I've done the research to find, and giving them a sense of, these are the things that are going on in your area. How do you feel you might connect and be able to serve your local environment by making changes to your lifestyle, or simply being aware of our relationship with the land. So that's the work that I do. I'm looking forward to discussing more. take it away, Steve.
Hi, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Steve Trombulak, and like Kirsten, I'm a scientist. I'm coming at this from the realm of science. In particular, I'm a conservation biologist. I'm currently a Professor Emeritus of Biology and Environmental Studies at Middlebury College, where I was on the faculty for 35 years before retiring 4 years ago. And as a practitioner of conservation biology, I really came at or went about doing my work in a way that really combined both the science and advocacy. Conservation biology has a number of normative principles, and one of them is just simply that biological diversity has intrinsic value independent of its instrumental or utilitarian values. And for several decades was deeply involved with wilderness protection programs and rewilding. I worked with John Davis for many years. Some of you may have heard John's presentation a couple hours ago at the ANA. And in a sense, metaphorically, what I was doing by linking my work as a biologist with my biopolitics advocacy for conservation, I was really uniting the mind with the hands. I have a strong belief that science helps us understand how the world works, but advocacy, and in particular, conservation advocacy, is the work to do something with that knowledge. But what had been missing for me was bringing in the third theme, which Chris just highlighted, which is that of spirit. And as an ecologist, I had an innate belief in the goodness and the rightness of nature, of all of nature, very much coming out of Aldo Leopold's school of thought. And I needed, for my own personal reasons, for I won't call it sanity, but for my mental health, I needed to find a way to integrate spirit into the work that I was doing as both a scientist and an advocate. And I found that in a community of people that helped me understand that really what I was practicing was a form of animism. So I now consider my spiritual practice to be of animism, the belief that spirit lives in all beings and not just humans. So now I live in a world where the hands, the mind, and the heart are united and work together to achieve the goal of protecting life on Earth and restoring it, which is really what rewilding is about, is bringing it back to what it was, independent of the manipulations we've made as a human species. So my life as an animist brought me into a community of a very large number of like-minded people, the majority of whom were artists, art artists, musicians, dancers, singers, poets, painters, sculptors, weavers, woodworkers, you name it as an art. And these folks are in this large distributed network of like-minded people. And that really is how I solidified my ongoing journey, the integration of that journey of art and science towards the goal of protecting and restoring life on Earth. So even before my retirement, I was integrating art into my teaching, like Kirsten described. Mine was more in service of helping students better understand and better integrate the information. And I'm going to show a few slides, I hope. Yeah, here we go. So all of these really come from my environmental science class, less so my conservation biology, but the visual arts, the representation of what you see with a message behind it, I have found over the years actually allows students to better understand really what's going on. This is a painting from a small family farm, the wall of a building at a small family farm in Illinois, Erewhon Farm, and I use it to get the students thinking about, well, what is agriculture? What are the components of agriculture? I could do that with a bullet point list in PowerPoint, but they're not going to remember it or grok it in a serious way without a visual representation. But if you really think about this, and if we had 15 minutes to just unpackage this as an understanding of what an agroecosystem is, it's all there. You've got sunlight, you've got water, you've got the soil to provide nutrients, you've got the crops, but you've got the human component as well. The labor, the tools, the transportation network that is necessary to bring crops to market. And Erewhon Farm was great at running a CSA. So their distributed network of farm to table. Talking about extinction, this is a painting by Martin Bridge, Vanishing Nautilus 1. And it really highlights the issue of the loss of biological diversity through the lens of one species that has survived for hundreds of millions of years, but is slowly going extinct, actually rapidly going extinct, ironically, because of how beautiful the shells are, and they're being hunted to near extinction as a result of their trade in the arts. What Martin did with this painting was actually highlighted it with changing tone across the canvas, the loss of biological diversity within the nautiloid line, and the sharp demarcations represent in an actual real scaled way the major mass extinction events in the history of multicellular life on Earth. And I commissioned this piece from Martin for the School of the Environment at Middlebury, and it's now hanging in the Freeman Environmental Center, the Franklin Environmental Center at Middlebury College. Chris Jordan's photographic work on the death of animals in Midway, talking about pollution. It's one thing to talk about microplastics and talk about the pollution that exists on the seas. It's another thing to see it represented in this way, and it drives home the real consequences of what we're doing to the oceans in general, but to the wildlife that lives there in a way that viscerally affects the students. And they will remember the concept of marine pollution more than if, again, just a bullet point list on a slide or a graph from a science journal article. The land art movement, Robert Smithson's spiral jetty in the Great Salt Lake. It's a fantastic piece of land art and subject of a lot of analysis over the years. But you look at this picture, this is in the Great Salt Lake, and it opens the door for talking about the effects of water withdrawal for agriculture in the American West, the changes in salinity and the biological diversity in the waters, and climate change. The fact that the drought in the West is not something that is likely to end anytime soon in any real long-term way, and is completely out of the range of anything that's been seen in the archaeological record. And if you look at a time series of these photos, you just see how much the Great Salt Lake has shrunk as a result of human actions, both in the immediate region and globally. Now, I bring up those examples, but my own artistic practice is really what I call word working. I'm a poet. I write mostly and perform. Well, I write mostly in prose and poetry, and I perform almost exclusively in spoken word poetry, slams and that kind of thing. I will be talking in the next hour in the green bar of presentations with Martin Bridge about the book we just released with Nature Culture not too many months ago, The Way of Gaia. And so I don't want to belabor the book right now, because then you need to come and meet Martin and his presentation, because an incredible artist. Martin was did the visual content, and I did the textual content. But to give you a sense of what we were doing in the book has 44 entries that address topics, all sorts of topics in ecology, evolution, and the environment, and actually try to highlight our connection to Gaia, to the tree of life, to Mother Earth. And I'm a real stickler for scientific truth and accuracy, because I think without that, we don't actually get to the real core of what the solutions are. But I also want it to be lyrical as much as possible. And so you've probably seen this painting in the background of many of people's backgrounds on the ANA. This is one of Martin's paintings that I used to write a piece about photosynthesis and how, in effect, it is a miracle. And if you look closely at the painting, you can see surrounding it is actually in glyph form the chemical formula for carbohydrates. And the fact that the red around here is really a wavelength that the chlorophyll molecule preferentially absorbs and not reflects. So the work that I do as an artist, a textual artist, a word worker, is to try to bring the science in and work with a visual artist to make something that is more than either one of us could do on our own. One of the things that I think we're going to break out into shortly is talking about some of these questions about integration of art and science. How can it be combined to provide greater awareness and involvement and action on environmental issues? And I'll just throw out my answer to that right now, is that it really involves collaboration. There are many people who are scientists who are also authors, or I'm sorry, artists, and there are artists who are also scientists, but really they are far fewer than the collection of artists and the collection of scientists. And it's desperately needed right now. Without the science, we won't get to actual solutions to these challenges that we face. And without artists, we can't, I think, in an effective way, tap into the hearts and souls of the people that need to be involved in making that happen. So this particular entry in the book, The Way of Gaia, is about DNA. And again, I'm not going to belabor the book, but that painting was recently purchased and now hangs in the atrium of the University of Maryland's medical school. And the very handsome gentleman that is on the ladder, partly to give you the scale of what's going on, is Dr. Owen White, the director of the bioinformatics group at the medical school and one of the key players in the Human Genome Project from a couple of decades ago. So collaboration is critical, and what we need to do as a society and as practitioners of either science or art in any form is to really foster those collaborations, to seek out people who are in that other part of the larger domain, because they all serve the same ends, or can be used to serve the same ends, and we need to be in dialogue with each other and create together. And then what society needs to do is to foster those collaborations and not try to put art and science in different boxes and not act as if they cannot be in conversation with each other. So I think with that, I should stop and turn this back to whoever would like to frame this next. Kirsten, I believe.
Well,
Yes.
we're going to bring all of you in so that you can have a dialogue together.
Oh, cool.
All right. Well, thanks, both of you. It's really fascinating to hear a lot more about your work. So, I mean, Steve, you talked a little bit about the first question I have to ask you. So, kudos for that.
Mm.
And I don't know, in your experience, but certainly what I've seen is that there's this thought that science and art in all its forms, when I say art, are somehow inherently different, even though they're branches on the exact same tree, but they're kind of viewed as being independent. And I would say I see this a lot more from the science realm.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, environmental science, environmental studies is kind of considered soft science, which I hate that word, but particularly among the hard science folks, there's this absolute, I don't want to say fear, but definite resistance and probably definite undervaluing of the power of integration of science and art, and the fact that they are essentially on the same spectrum. So why, and both of you, because certainly too, chime in, but why do you think there is that perception? And maybe Chris, you can kind of address, is there that same perception from the purely art side, that science is out there, not connected?
Actually, I think I had a perfect example when I was at my master's degree, which is actually where my idea for this work, letting the land lead, came from. I was over in Scotland at the Glasgow School of Art, and the way they do their dorm rooms is different. So a friend of mine was staying with a student from another school who was training to be a math teacher, and she and I got into this, I won't say heated argument, but it was definitely passionate about this idea with the, right brain, left brain kind of people, and whether or not that's functional overall. What it came down to was really the sense of like, I'm a dancer. I understand dancing because my body wants to do that, and that's how I communicate, how I see the world. And I've never been particularly good at math overall. I had to try harder. I had to, work to wrap my brain around it in a way that she didn't have issues with. Um, but she insisted that, it depended on your training. It depended on your like who taught you and how, and all of that may be true. But I think there is definitely um that sort of dividing line, mental dividing line, so to speak, almost like right and left brain idea, again, whether that's functional or not. Um, and I think it's been really interesting to me to be able to bring in and see folks who are really interested in ballet or modern dance, or like to hike or things along those lines, but being able to then bring them into an experience where that line is erased completely, and there are people who have never thought of themselves as spiritual or meditators or anything along those lines, be able to come back to me afterwards and say, I was the tree. I felt it when you were leading us through this thing. And I think that really does speak to the way that art can bring in an experience of science and an experience of the world around us, that allows for that line to not only become fuzzy but to disappear completely without folks really noticing it. So yes, it's all one and the same. It's all present at hand. And I think that's just a really powerful and beautiful thing.
Yeah, I recognize that there is a great comfort for people in being able to treat the world and everything in it in a binary way. Science and art are the same, or they're not the same. And, are birds the same as mammals? It depends on what scale you look at. Birds have a very different physiology and anatomy and behavior than most mammals, but they're all vertebrates. And, are they the same or different from corals? Well, yeah, but they're all animals. So the tree of life should, if we take it as a mental metaphor and we recognize that there's just this diversity of life on Earth, it really highlights that it's not binary. One of the, I didn't show this image because it sort of gets a little trite, but one of the images that I'd like to show in my science class is the cover of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon album, because people like to talk about light and dark. And if you know that album, it's light going through a prism and the colors are broken out. So it's not light or no light. There's a diversity there. So to get at the core of your question, yeah, there are plenty of scientists out there who think that the arts don't matter. And my question to them has always been, well, what's your goal with the science? If you want to do anything at all that speaks to people, then you better include the arts. And that's why I think we see this emerging or being represented so much within the environmental sciences, is because the environmental sciences make no pretense that we're trying to be value neutral about what we do. Conservation biology in particular, I like to contrast or to compare really with medicine. Conservation biology has as some basic philosophical principles. Extinction is bad and life is good, which is no different than medicine. Medicine talks about, doctors do not debate whether or not someone dying is good or bad, really. I mean, they try to heal for a reason. They believe in that. I'm sure you can come up with a scientist who doesn't have that kind of interest in trying to connect what they're doing with humanity or non-human peoples, if you adopt my animistic view of the tree of life. And their goal is just simply the raw pursuit of knowledge. Well, maybe for them, art isn't all that important. They're in it for themselves and what they know, and it's a simple matter of understanding what this atom does or what happens if you put these two molecules together or integrate the equation in a particular way. And I mean, no disrespect to any branch of science or any art, but the union of it, the integration of those domains of knowledge and creativity are extremely relevant if what you care about is life on Earth. Which I am. So,
yeah, well said. I like to think about the fact, I'm a musician, as well, and play several different instruments, including bamboo pipe, which is really cool because we have to make our own instruments as part of a guild system. So very old school, made out of bamboo, natural material. So when we're creating, the holes for the fingering, no two pipes are the same, even if they're all soprano pipes or alto pipes or bass pipes. It depends upon the circumference of the reed, where the reed was grown, the humidity at the time, that bamboo was there. And we use natural cork, for the mouthpiece, and same thing. And then as soon as humidity happens, it all kind of goes to heck in a handbasket. But I think, things like arts, and certainly, I would say from the music side, there's some really interesting advances happening in several fields of science that are going through, I'd say, music / sound in particular. I mean, there's this whole field now, not necessarily translating, but using vibrational frequency as an analytical tool, so that everything is vibrating, whether it's molecules in a cell or chemicals in the water system, and essentially using that to determine health. And I have a friend and I are kind of working right now on a project that's basically turning out to be a symphony of a stream. So we're taking that concept that everything has vibrational frequencies and translating every aspect, whether it's PAR values, the photosynthetically active radiation values that are emitting from different species, and giving that a tonal quality, and then translating that into, score, and having some more friends that play different instruments, playing that. I will not say it's the most pleasant thing to listen to. It's very modern. And I'm kind of thinking, like, is it because I chose, that site I showed you in the slide where they were doing the Sum Nagashi? That's the site we're using. Like, is it because I chose a really contaminated site that's just downstream from a brownfield that's so discordant? Maybe I should find a cleaner environment, and maybe it's a little bit better sounding. But
well, and then compare the two. I mean, that's one way to, auditorily, it will help you help people hear the difference between those two visual chemical landscapes.
And we want to also translate it to different colors so that it's accessible for all audiences, not just audio. But in my spare time, I'll do that. So another question for all of you, both of you, is, we've talked a lot about how at least the three of us definitely feel this is a strong thing to incorporate the arts and science, and both of you have given great examples of how your projects and your work can be used for advocacy and increasing knowledge. But what I'm interested in learning, what you would suggest might be ways that other artists and scientists, both of them, could be supported in their work and trying to, in quote, bridging this perceived gap that we've just kind of been talking about between the two disciplines of art and science. So what can be done? Because at least what I've kind of found, and there are people that are interested, but it's not necessarily as easy to find them until you find a bunch, and then you're like, they're everywhere. But it's not like there's right now a major conference, let's say, to kind of celebrate that. So I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are for that.
With a complete open field, there's all sorts of great things that can be done if you throw money at it, right? Since I retired, I haven't really kept up with what's going on at the federal granting level, but I can imagine some great opportunities that could be jointly funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Science Foundation. And there are programs within National Science Foundation that require collaborations across disciplines within the sciences. You could easily set up a granting program that was addressing some of the key strategic goals of the federal government, what they want from science, and say, these grants are going to go to collaborative efforts that meaningfully include both the arts and sciences. I'm a product of traditional academia, so I've spent my entire career within a college hierarchy, and I can tell you nothing speaks louder than bringing in a grant, being part of something that generates money for the institution. And it goes beyond being somebody's boutique project and more towards being something that supports the larger goals. And, it goes on the website and it raises everybody's profile. Yeah, so that's my answer. I don't know, Chris, what do you think?
I I definitely smiled and laughed at that a bit, because it's a lot of times it is a monetary issue. One of the things, so I was part of an arts fellowship last year that does amazing work with individual artists who are trying to bring about change in their community. It's really focused on leaders, arts leaders in communities, providing a service of some kind. And one thing that we all sort of came into this fellowship with was this idea of competition between artists, and how small so many of the grants are. And if we're working as artists full time, it becomes very difficult to support ourselves, because arts, to speak to that difference between the arts and the sciences, or the perceived difference, is that art is not worth funding. It's a fun thing you do in your spare time, or if you do it full time, then you shouldn't expect to have funds to live, because you love what you do, so that's enough. And I can tell you, it's certainly not. I think one of the things, speaking to that grants situation, is that I think a lot of the arts and sciences grants, I think it's a wonderful thing to have that collaboration, and that sort of lemniscate idea of connecting both, and cross-referencing and cross-connecting. But from an arts perspective, or anything along those lines, the competition idea, and this thing that we've had in a traditional gallery setting for a long time, is that if you get a grant, you hold on to it, or if you get an opportunity, you hold on to it, and you make sure that you get your work out there. And a lot of times that closes down opportunities, both for other artists, but also for yourself. And so I'm seeing a very, very slow change in that mentality, because we're taught to fear, in the arts community in particular. We're taught to fear that we won't be able to do what we need to do, specifically because of funding, and lack of opportunities. But when we do collaborate, when we do reach out across disciplines, or across even to people who there's actually somebody I know in Boston who's doing very similar dance work, and comes from a very similar background, but her project is so incredibly different, even though the themes are the same. And there are people that I would send her way because they'll understand it better. So having that sense of competition dissolve as much as possible. It's a tricky thing, but like I said, we're taking slow steps in that direction. But really, just going out. I mean, there's the example from The Artist's Way, which I'm slowly starting to read, but this idea of artist dates, and finding ways to connect with inspiration and art, and then reaching out to artists, or reaching out to scientists, because I think at our core, we want to be approachable, and we're often seen as cold or aloof, or hoity-toity, or whatever. And really, I think it's that ability to connect, even just through an email, or a comment on an Instagram post, or something like that, that says, "Hey, this is really interesting. I would love to know more," with fellow artists, or the public in general. I think that tearing down of walls between people is what allows for us to actually do what we need to do, both as scientists and artists. So hopefully we can bring that spirit in.
Yeah, can I add to that? Because Chris, something you just said reminded me of one of the internal barriers in science. Again, I'm coming from academia. I have no background in the private sector, but the currency that is measured for success within sciences, within academia, is not just bringing in money, but it's publications. And one of the barriers that many scientists feel about collaborating with artists is, hey, if it's not going to result in a publication, I can't afford to spend the time doing it. I'm willing to go to a play and watch it, but engaging with the director or the playwright to really integrate the science into the narrative of the play and the staging, I just don't have the time for that. So if we really want to make a change, and academia wants to be part of making the change, it needs to expand the metrics of success, metrics of scholarship and productivity, so that scientists would be able to say, hey, you're putting on Arcadia by Tom Stoppard. It's all about fractals. I'm a mathematician. Let me come in to what you're doing and help improve how that narrative unfolds. Stopper intended it in the writing, but it's often not highlighted in the actual staging and the production of it. And you've got to be a special kind of mathematician to say, I'm just going to spend the time doing it, and I'm not going to worry about getting tenure.
Yeah, I would say, I agree wholeheartedly with all what you're saying, Stephen and Chris. But to me, it's less than how the individual person could benefit or be improved by it. It's the fact that let's face reality. How many people are in the public are reading scientific journal articles that the scientists directly publish themselves? It's even smaller than that. It's probably a negative number. I mean, that's for the science community, and at its heart, science is about getting the data out. At least conservation science, getting the data out to where it can matter, where something can be done. Doing science for yourself is just an ego trip. It's it's not. It's not what needs to be done. But then you look at how many people I know that are just struggling, but how many people go to anything art, or how many people are reading poetry or reading literature, or going to a museum, compared to that teeny tiny amount that are reading scientific research journal articles. And to me, scientists need to wake up a little bit and kind of reevaluate the arts and humanities as, here's another peer-reviewed publication that is going to get the data out and get it out quicker. Especially with I do some work with climate science, and we don't have the luxury of waiting, because by the time you get it into a peer-reviewed journal article, let's face it, your data is not worthless, but it's kind of out of date, and
it's out of date.
we need to get stuff out so that action can be taken. And people are reading music, and they're reading dance, and they're reading plays. They're not reading journal articles. So do you guys have any final thoughts? Because I know we're getting to the end of our time, and I know, Steve, you have another session right after this, so I want to be.
Yeah.
I'd like to just briefly touch on what you just said, Kirsten. Like, that is a really wonderful point, because artists, most of the artists that I know are activists, and to have the way to understand, like, I would love to connect more with the science world to talk about what's really going on, and then be able to put it in a language that my audiences can understand. And I know obviously Martin Bridge, putting it in a visual, because I understand that language better than I would reading a peer-reviewed article. I think that's really at the heart of what we're talking about here. That connection that allows for languages to be broad enough for audiences to understand. It's a magical thing. So.
Yeah, ditto. I'll end with that.
All right. So I think we'll turn it back over to Paul to wrap up and transition to the next session. Thank both of you very much.
Before you go, I just want to say thank you very much. That was all great. The only input I would have from what you were saying was, I did my I did a poetry festival for 11 years, and I changed it after the first year because people would say, I hate poetry. So they didn't want to come to it. So I changed it to a word festival, which goes into many things that you were talking about, how to get out of the specialization and open it up. Well, do you like words? Was that poetry? Was that prose? Was that a short story? I don't know. What do you think? And sort of was kind of really wild to realize that people get so specialized, or they have a view of science or poetry that they experienced in high school that they say, I don't like now, or I'm not a scientist, or I'm not a writer. And so we have to figure out how to bridge that. And but thank you all very much for that presentation, and thanks for being part of the festival.